Hello, this is Craig McDonald. These two short videos aim to present some ideas about technology quality and technology ethics. And I've tried to put these ideas into some theoretical frameworks, but mostly to end each topic with a discussion about how we might apply this stuff in practice. So, well, let's start. Quality and ethics. Quality is sometimes thought of as doing the thing right, while ethics is doing the right thing. A little quality cloud. So this talk will be part A for quality and the second talk, part B, on ethics. So quality, here's an argument about quality. Firstly, the statement, this is a good wine. I sometimes hear this, not just because I drink a bit of wine from time to time, but also because I spent several years with the Cooperative Research Centre for Viticulture, developing systems to help wine makers and grape growers to generate better wine. This is a good wine. Now the question is this phrase a description of the state of the person tasting it, like I like it? Sometimes when we taste something, we say, oh, this is a good wine, or this is a good video. Or is it alternatively a description of the wine itself? That is, if you look at the wine, you hold it up to the light, you look at the colour and you see whether it's crystal clear or whether there's just that little bit of cloudiness in that's kind of spoils it a little bit. You can see how that idea of the description of the wine is something that can be tested by other people, whereas saying it's a good wine because I like it is purely a personal thing. That's why we refer to the first way of using the phrase, this is a good wine, as being subjective. It refers to my state. And the second method is, well, I'm describing the wine itself, something that other people could test as well. Now, professional tasters use some very specialist descriptive wine language, things like hints of roasted plum that you might see written on the back of a wine bottle, and you might say, oh, look, this is just rubbish. What rubbish is that? Well, in fact, it's not. There's a whole set of terms that are used to describe various aspects of particular kinds of grape. So it's not just made up, it's not PR, it is actually a set of flavours and a set of colours that can be detected in a wine by a professional taster, and that every professional taster should be able to detect these same chemicals in the wine that deliver these particular flavours that have been so oddly described, such as roasted plum. So, professional vocabulary for making an objective description of the wine. But if describing the subjective experience can't account for why it's a good wine, and describing the actual attributes also can't account for it being a good wine, I mean, if it's clear, what's good about that necessarily? How can we account for wine judges coming to the decisions that they do? So here's a descriptive piece. A winemaker might say, this Grenache is slightly cloudy, it's also a little flabby, it's got 12% alcohol, these are all descriptors. Therefore, it's not good enough for a bronze medal. Now the question is, how did they get to that? How did they get to this judgment of the goodness of the wine from purely a description of its objective attributes? Well, that's a question. The answer is that the wine judges have agreed a pattern by which they will assess wines, a wine tasting pattern. Now, all judges who use this pattern will come to the same judgment about the quality of the wine, given the same values of the attributes of the wine. Now, wine tasters are all trained, and they're trained to detect in the wine various chemicals and to look for various sorts of colours and to describe that wine, the wine's objective attributes then to look up the pattern and see what kind of a medal it should get. So the conclusion from this little argument, which I'm going to take a step further in a minute, is that objective quality is not a natural property of objects or events. This is the general argument for using the wine as an example. Objective quality is not a natural property of an object. You can't find whether it's good quality by simply inspecting an object. Quality is a judgment by someone based on an agreed quality pattern. There's our conclusion from the previous step. So in the wine tasting profession, the quality pattern they have links the attributes or criteria with the judgment. Here's how it works. Here is a pattern which includes the various kinds of attributes around the outside, the various measures of each attribute along these measurement scales. And then this pattern here is the one which establishes a bronze medal for Grenache. A silver medal will go on the outside of the blue line, a gold medal further out, where the attributes are becoming better and better in terms of these measurements. And it's that pattern which allows the wine judge to make their decisions. Here's an example of what that pattern might look like. This is a wine tasting scoring sheet that wine judges use. Here is a list of criteria, and here are the measures of each of those criteria. So here's for clarity at the top, and it might be brilliant translucent, and there's our hazy wine. And here are various points that might be scored for Grenache on that scale. Here are the points, and by putting for one particular wine, I've detected it to have this attribute. That's where the X goes in the cell. Now, how does the process work? Well, here is the wine taster tasting the wine. Here is their objective assessment of the attributes. Here is the matching of the pattern against our pattern, and here is the determination of the bronze medal. So what we need is a clear description of what the object is, of what the wine is. There's the wine being tasted. Here's the description of its attributes. Here's matching its attributes against the pattern and determining the gold medal or bronze medal. So let's turn to IT work. So all of our IT work, like a bottle of wine, is an objective object, and it can be assessed for its quality. The question is, what kind of quality pattern have we got that we can apply to IT work? Well, here's a couple of examples of other patterns. This is a quality pattern for papers, academic papers that we submit to academic journals. And I've just selected the Australian Journal of Information Systems as an example. And here is a list of attributes which the paper should have in order to be accepted for publication in the journal. So they've decided that this is their pattern. That's for publishing a paper in a journal. Number two, most university degrees in Australia are accredited with the Australian Computing Society. And here is the list of criteria that the ACS uses to make a judgment about the quality of academic programs in ICT. The ACS looks at the institutional governance, the leadership and the staffing. It looks at each program's title, objectives and structure to see if they're coherent. It looks for whether or not the program is actually going to produce a professional who is useful in industry, has a professional role to fulfill and has the requisite skills. The ACS looks for the body of knowledge in the course or program. Professional knowledge is things like communication skills, professional ethics and so on. It looks at the breadth of knowledge that a graduate will have of ICT, and it looks at their specialisation. So if somebody has specialised in software engineering, it looks at the software engineering aspects. It looks at the subjects that are at the third year of courses, the advanced level subjects, and it looks at whether or not knowledge is integrated and applied. So a set of quality criteria used by the ACS in order to determine the quality of educational programs. A third example, and one you might give some thought to, what's the quality pattern for your current assignment? Do you know what that quality pattern is? Do you know how your assignment is going to be observed by the marker and how they're going to determine marks for it? So the question is, who develops these patterns? And because they themselves are artifacts, have the patterns been quality assured? So in the case one above, the journal, the editorial board of the journal has decided what the pattern is, and they've used their experience and so on to build up criteria. Now, whether that pattern works or not, whether this does produce a high quality paper, isn't really the question. The question is, what is the pattern by which we're going to judge it? I reckon this is actually an important question, and that the board of this journal, the editorial board, should be giving some thought to whether or not its pattern is a good one, whether it actually meets other criteria. In case two, it's exactly the same idea. The ACS has decided what the pattern is, and in this case, it's based on international agreements and the Australian Education Quality Standards, so it does have some other bases, but it's still not clear that an accredited course is any better than a non-accredited course. So it's a question. It's a bit of a puzzle. It's up there for testing. Case three, what's the quality pattern for your assignment? So the question is, who developed that pattern? And has that pattern been quality assured? Do you know whether or not your rubrics that are used to assess your assignment are actually good rubrics? Who says that they're good? Turning now to information technology. What sort of patterns have we got that we can apply to information technology products and processes to see whether they're any good? Clearly, our professional work is objective, so it's able to be assessed for quality. So I'm going to talk about 4 different classes of quality criteria. The first one is general, and this applies to any professional action or artifact. And it has to do with context awareness, whether or not the artifact sits well in an overall design or overall way of being in which that artifact is going to actually exist, whether it's based on evidence, whether it's been professionally done. Is there some good reason for why this is the way it is, or is it just been hacked? Is it useful for all of the situations in which users are going to find themselves, or has it been designed for just one situation? And considering all of the stakeholders who are involved in this artifact, how will they be affected? Has it been examined to make sure that everybody who is affected by this action or by this artifact is going to be beneficially affected, or is it going to do lots of harm? And we'll address this a lot more in the second part of this talk, in part B. So these are general criteria that apply to pretty well any professional action. You could apply advice from your general practitioner to these things to see whether or not his advice or her advice is professionally done. The 3 others are getting more and more close to the technology itself are general IT criteria. These are applied to IT artifacts and they'll look pretty familiar to you. Every IT artifact needs to have its security taken into account, whether it's got privacy effects, whether it's efficient, reliable. Can you reuse it? Can you inspect it? Is it traceable and open? The general IT criteria. And if you have a look at the COVID-19 app the COVID safe app that the government delivered, it's actually released the source code, and there's plenty of discussion about some of these attributes of that code to be found on the web. So general IT criteria that you could apply to just about everything. But then there's specific criteria for different sorts of artifacts. We know when we're looking at a database design, yes, it has to have a whole bunch of these general criteria and has to meet the general professional criteria on the previous page, but it also has a whole set of criteria of its own just because it's database design. For example, normalization. Are the data attributes properly applied to the objects to which they've been assigned, and so on. Interface design has a totally different set of criteria. Those are user experience criteria, appropriate to interface design, not appropriate to database design. So we're getting more and more specific as we go through. The final one is that in any particular situation in which technology is applied, there may be special or unique attributes of that situation which we may need to take into account. And so that needs to be inspected and specified if there is such a thing in the quality pattern. So what these four things do is they give us a set of criteria from which we can build a pattern that's appropriate to the artifact we're currently constructing. So how do we implement all this in practice? Well, that's not easy. The principle is that every systems development product and process deserves to have a quality criteria, set of criteria specified for it, a pattern. It deserves to be designed such that it meets that criteria, and it deserves to be assessed and quality assured against the criteria to ensure that it is of high quality. Now, this shouldn't be new to anyone, really. We're all pretty accustomed to this sort of thing. I mean, when we think about programming, every module and assembly needs to be tested to destruction, right? We understand all that. And so a test pack needs to accompany every system so that any minor change in the future can be properly tested. So a test pack, a clear quality assurance product that goes along with every module and every system to ensure that it meets quality standards. Test pack, I hear you say? Test pack? We're an agile shop. We don't have test packs. Well, yes, possibly. And there's a whole set of other non-functional quality patterns beyond a test pack, which a module or a programmed system would have to meet if it was to be accepted as a quality piece of code. Code has to be understandable and modifiable by a programmer who is much less skilled than the author. If you're writing code, which is very cunning, but only 2 people in the world can understand it, this is not considered to be professionally good quality code. Does the code follow standards and conventions? For naming, for example. Are the code elements traceable to requirements? So quite a lot of programmers who have committed fraud have been able to do it by inserting fraudulent code into the programs they're writing. Why weren't these detected by quality assurance people? There are a whole bunch of these criteria which need to be specified for every artifact that we build, appropriately specified. The artifacts need to be designed to meet the criteria, and there needs to be quality assurance to test each artifact. To step back a bit, here's how we might do this with non-code. This is a screenshot from the front of a project management support system. This support system records all of the documents that are generated within a project, and it does it by the stakeholders. So the project team has a whole bunch of sorts of documents, project plans and so on, that refer to it. Redevelopers, they're the people that come after the development team, after installation, when the system has to be upgraded and whatever. There's our little test pack. The business owner has documents, an owner's manual to tell them how to go about assessing whether or not this system is actually doing what it's supposed to do from the business perspective. Here are our user manuals, user guides. The systems manager, the person who's working with the architecture that our system is located in, needs to have a whole lot of information provided for her. And the business manager needs to be able to run the business systems that surround the code that we generated. So here's a whole set of different kinds of stakeholders for an IT development, all of whom need to be addressed specifically and in different ways. There are our stakeholders then, and that's not even taking into account the external stakeholders, customers, unions, the families of employees, and so on. Here are our immediate stakeholders. And we'll take one example, which is the system's owner's manual. So the person who's owning this system wants to know how this system will contribute to the overall business strategy, wants to know how it's going to measure systems performance, how is it performing. The owner needs to know about how the benefits that were promised by this system are actually going to be realised, what the risk management is, that is how we're going to manage various risks and what the risks are that this system might present to the business. And here are the compliance side, the legals and the audit compliance. These are the kinds of things that your systems analyst and your systems designer have in their context. So when the solutions architect is building a solution from the outside, these are the things which have to be specified, documented, and they will be tested. These things can be tested against the system as delivered to ensure that it all works. But from a quality perspective, look at this. Here's a final part to this document called quality assurance, which is how do we know any of this is any good? That's the big quality question. How do I know this is any good? And here is a whole lot of different quality criteria, a quality pattern for this kind of document to tell whether or not it's any good. And here is how we have tested this document against these kinds of criteria. So the argument here is that we have an idea of all of our products being objective and therefore quality being able to be applied to them. We've had this idea that in IT work, there are layers of possible sources of criteria for any particular piece of work we're producing, and that each system development product and process, whether it's a code module or whether it's a business owner's manual, deserves to have the quality criteria specified. It needs to be designed to meet the criteria, and it needs to be assessed to see whether or not it has met that criteria. ICT quality assurance is a seriously important thing. And quality by design, this idea of having quality assessed for every actual component, is a very strong way of going about addressing this need. Now, next we'll see what's going to happen with ethics, because quality and ethics are quite closely linked. So that's an introduction to quality and setting a bit of a framework for our conversation about ethics. Thank you.